How's everyone doing? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, bring you guys another round of stories around the NFL to discuss on today. Talk about a lot of things that have happened on the social media aspect of things and just in negotiations with free agency all going on. Today on the show, I'm going to be covering the online Twitter beef that happened between Tiki Barber and Saquon Barkley. Obviously, with Saquon going to the Eagles, a lot of people weren't happy about it, but Tiki Barber, a former running back for the Giants, had a lot of things to say. So I'm going to get into that and my thoughts on it. Then I'm going to transition into the Chargers. The news broke today that they were releasing Mike Williams, and that was big for salary cap reasons, but I'm going to talk about that move and potentially more moves that could be coming because they're still not in the best of salary cap situations, so I'll touch on that. Then in the second half of the show, I'm going to dive deeper into the AFC North. There was a lot of interesting moves that happened just in that division, between teams in that division. I think that will greatly impact next season, so I'm going to dive into each of those teams and some of their biggest acquisitions or departures from each of the four teams in the AFC North. And then I'll wrap it all up with a discussion on the Washington Commanders and my belief on them next season. I have high hopes for them, and I think they could be a dark horse next season. Find out all the reasons why towards the end of the show. That's going to be an interesting discussion. But before I jump into the chip shot story of the day, I want to remind you guys, as always, if you have any questions, comments, or want to engage in the show in any way, to please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker below me at gsmcpodcast.net. Again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. This just makes sure I'm able to see your question. It comes in during the live show, right away during the segment. I'm able to read it on air and, maybe take the conversation elsewhere or get a different perspective on what I'm saying. It makes it a lot more fun, in my opinion, and it's also a massive help for this show, as well as all the other shows across the network. We always greatly appreciate it anytime you guys are able to use that link. But in saying that, I can move into the first segment. The chip shot story, as always, has to do with Tiki Barber and Saquon Barkley. Arguably the biggest move of free agency was the Saquon Barkley move, not just because it's Saquon Barkley, but because of all the other things that surrounded it. He was a New York Giant, and he had offers from a lot of teams. I'm sure a lot of different teams that weren't in the NFC East wanted Saquon or had the idea that they could get him on their team. But he decided to go to the rival Philadelphia Eagles, and that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I came on here and talked about it, how, just the drama around the whole thing, the suspense, and then realizing, oh my God, he went to the Philadelphia Eagles. That whole moment was crazy for me, and I'm not even a fan of either of those teams, but I have friends that are, and just their interaction is the kind of interaction you'd expect from fans that, have no real connection to the players or any perspective of being NFL players. So, they could essentially say whatever they want. Any comments or any way that they're feeling is true emotion, and there's not really any limit on what they can say about Saquon or just the whole situation on the Eagles. But it's different when it comes to Tiki Barber, a former running back for the Giants, of all teams, and he was very vocal about his feelings on Saquon before the whole tampering period started. And one of the biggest things, I don't have the exact quote, but to paraphrase it, he said, if Saquon was to leave, if he went to any other team that's not the Eagles or within the division, all the Giants fans would respect him. They would get it. They would still love him because they know that he's a good player and he needed to get his money. And one of the biggest points he emphasized was that he should never entertain the idea of going to the Philadelphia Eagles. Enough is said there. Giants, Eagles, how the feelings are there. But then, just on the first day, I'm pretty sure, of free agency, Saquon signs a big deal for running backs with the Philadelphia Eagles, and right away, Tiki Barber, and a bunch of people gave their reactions, but none was more famous than Tiki Barber's. He was on, I don't know if it was a podcast or just a show that he does in general, but he goes on there and says, "You're dead to us. Saquon, good luck. You're dead to me." And there obviously was a lot of reaction to that. In that aspect, I think he just reacted in the moment. He felt obviously very emotional about it. He prefaced it before free agency started that how he would feel if he went to the Eagles, and Saquon ends up going to the Eagles, and he says that out loud to everyone over social media. Saquon obviously is gonna see it, and whether he responds to it, that was a different story, different direction. He does respond to it, and the first thing he said was, "LOL, yep, you're the prime example of loyalty to a team," among other things, like, if fans feel like they have to hate me, let them hate me, it is what it is. He did the best for him. That was the one tweet that he put out there. Then, another response that came out, he also later said, "You've been a hater since I got to New York, and all the dead to me talk, don't smile in my face when you see me." That, a little bit more personal with Tiki Barber, because his quotes from Tiki Barber were pretty personal to begin with, and that's where I wanted to get to, because Tiki Barber, I think, has a very different perspective than a lot of us. I'm not saying he shouldn't be a fan and he shouldn't have those emotions, because he's obviously, by the looks of it, still invested in the Giants. He still wants them to be good because he was there. But at the same time, to respond like that, you don't have to say it on the show or whatever. You could keep that to everyone amongst friends. You could say something else about Saquon, or you could just decide to not comment on it at all, and that would have been enough. Enough people would have known how you felt about it from that moment. But to say, "Oh, you're dead to me," and he said it almost pretty serious, quite honestly, if you look at it, the live video of it anywhere on social media, he seemed pretty serious about it. He didn't smile or anything really when he said it. I'm pretty sure there was another Giants host on there, so the emotions were already pretty hostile, I guess, from the move. And he said it, and I just think he came at it from a fan perspective right away in that moment, where I think he should have taken a little bit of time to think about it. Know, just from his experience in being in Saquon's position, a running back experiencing an unfair market, what did you expect Saquon to do really in that moment? It's not his fault that he's been with the Giants. He's been there through all the ups and downs of the season. He's been there when they had that one good season with Brian Dable. His first season there, Daniel Jones played great. He was a part of it. Then the rest of the season were pretty lackluster, pretty mediocre. And Saquon was still there. He never really said anything bad about the organization or anything like that. Just kept it all to himself, kept it pretty professional. And obviously, the last straw, I think, for everyone that was aware of the situation, I talked about it a few shows ago, when they decided to pay, Daniel Jones instead of Saquon Barkley. I didn't really understand it. I talked about it. Saquon's been there. He's been your most talented, best player. How could you not pay him? You decide to franchise tag him and extend Daniel Jones, who already had some questions about him. I know he was coming off a decent season, but I think they just were too quick on making that decision, and now a year later, you're hearing things about the Giants moving on from Daniel Jones and not being able to keep Saquon Barkley, and now he goes to the Philadelphia Eagles when it all could have been avoided if you took a different direction when you made that decision on who to give all that money to. And saying all that, Saquon almost has his hands tied in a bit, because he is 27 already, hasn't had any signs of receiving a big contract from the Giants. They've just decided to franchise tag him. No real contract negotiations had been going on at all this offseason. So if you're Saquon, you have a really good option from the Philadelphia Eagles. A big contract. He's the only running back that received more than single digits per year on his contract. So how could you expect another offer to come around that could be even better than that? If you wait too long, that offer might be off the table and you're left with less money to go to potentially a worse team. In the moment, if you're Saquon, you understand it from a player perspective, and that's where I think Tiki Barber should have responded from a player perspective, from a running back perspective, and say something along the lines of, I've been there. I know what the market is like for running backs. I can understand the decision. I'm not happy about it, but I understand it. That would have resonated a lot better with everybody rather than him responding all emotional, saying all these stuff like he did. You're dead to me, Saquon, and stuff like that. How was Saquon going to take it? He took it pretty personal there to some extent, as it seemed in his response. But then, Tiki said that now they're in like a very hostile place, and you'd expect a lot of fans also to feel like that, but that's what just fans do. Fans that are very invested. You can imagine how Giants fans are feeling because of all the frustration and just poor performances they've had in the past. To see their best player go on top of Xavier McKinney, and now you don't really know where you stand at quarterback, they're feeling that sort of way. I just think Tiki Barber should have put his emotions aside just a little bit. You could have still been fired up, but to say things like that, I think he didn't think twice about that statement and what he said. He took it a bit too far for me. And just to compare it to other players you see, a big theme of this free agency has been players switching from rival teams to the other team. It's been more often than it has been in the past, just from my experience of seeing free agency and stuff like that. You had Saquon go to the Eagles, Patrick Queen go to the Steelers, and just among others, there's been some other just flipping of teams within the division. Geno Stone went to the Cincinnati Bengals from the Baltimore Ravens. There's been a lot of flipping teams just within the division, so it seems to be a theme about it, but the difference between those situations and this one was that their former teammates, I should say, were more supportive of it because they understood the business side of it, and they know a contract like this, an opportunity like this might not come around even more. Just another example off the top of my head, Calvin Ridley signed with the Tennessee Titans, another one within the division. He got 4 years, $92 million to go to a rival team, and at that point, you're not thinking about that. How are my teammates going to feel? Am I really doing the right thing? When you're offered that kind of money, life-changing money, a lot of times for players getting their first contract, more often than not, the decision is really made for you when you get a contract like that. And I think Tiki just forgot about all that. He didn't take it into perspective, and he responded more as a fan, where I think he should have responded more in Saquon's shoes and analyzing how he felt in that moment. I'm sure Saquon wasn't happy about it from a bit of his brain where he thought, I'm moving to rival teams. This could be weird in some aspect. I'm sure that crossed his mind at some point, but this was a tough decision in some aspects, and he took it. I think it was the best for him personally, and now, undoubtedly, he's on a better team, making more money, getting himself more chances of being in the playoffs, competing for the NFC, potentially competing for Super Bowls, and he's going to get hate down the line from Giants fans in general. You'd expect it once they play in New York. The boos are just going to rain down, but, that's just part of it. Fans are going to be fans, and for Saquon, best of luck to Saquon. He's on a better team. I like the move just because it was almost like a TV drama show that I was watching of just a shocking moment that happened. It was awesome because I'm not involved in it at all as a fan, but saying that, I'll leave it there. And in the meantime, I'm going to take it to our first break of the show, and when I come back, I have a lot more NFL stories to get into regarding the Chargers, the AFC North as a whole, and all the moving pieces within just that division, as well as a topic of conversation around the Washington Commanders and how I think they could be sneakily good this coming season. So don't go anywhere. More on that coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk more about stories around the NFL. Specifically now with the Chargers, they were one to watch with the tampering period coming down to the deadline before the new league year started. The story around the Chargers was their cap, them being over the cap, and I shouldn't say a bunch of players, really only 4 players taking up a majority of that cap space, specifically being Keenan Allen, Joey Bosa, Mike Williams, and Khalil Mack. They were taking up about half of their cap space, and specifically with Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, they were taking up they were gonna take a $36.6 million cap hit and $38.5 million cap hit in terms of how they were gonna affect the cap. 38.5 was gonna go from Khalil Mack and the other from Joey Bosa. Something had to be done in this situation with the Chargers because of the league rules stating that on Wednesday, today at 4 p.m., that every team had to be under the $255 million cap limit. So everyone was expecting something to be done, specifically around those 4 players. Was someone going to get traded, cut? Something had to be done with them. In the end, it was Mike Williams who drew the shortest straw, and he was released by the team. He was coming off a very devastating knee injury this past season, so he didn't really get to show everything just this past season, which was unfortunate. But, the circumstances wrote the story itself. You would rather keep Keenan Allen. I was least worried that he was going to get cut or traded. Joey Bosa was another one that I thought it just felt like they didn't really want to keep him. It felt like they wanted him on their team. They wanted him to stick around because pass rushers, as everyone knows, don't just grow on trees. You don't just draft one in the first round every year, or you have the potential to draft one in the first round every year. Not to the level of Joey Bosa. He's shown flashes of being very good. So he was another one that I wasn't really convinced about. The 2 biggest ones for me were Mike Williams and Khalil Mack. I honestly thought it was going to be Khalil Mack. And before, I want to say 2:30 or 3 o'clock when the news dropped today, the segment was going to be who I thought they should cut. And I was going to make my argument for Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack. But that decision was made for me. It was Mike Williams and neither of Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa. But with that story coming out, there were still reports that, they saved $20 million in cap money. They were $27 million over the cap, but they saved that $20 million and only take $12.5 million in dead money instead of the 30 plus or 32 million, I think it was, for Mike Williams' contract. So that's positive. They got under the limit, but they just barely got under it. With the Chargers, they're trying to build something special there. They were fortunate enough to have their franchise quarterback already in Justin Herbert, and everyone is buying into Jim Harbaugh and the kind of program that he wants to run, the organization that he wants to run. He's riding a good train of success coming in. Obviously, he won the national championship with Michigan. So there's a lot of good things, positive vibes coming from Jim Harbaugh. And it gets a lot of people excited, but they have to be able to do something for Jim Harbaugh so he can get the players that he wants in to really start this rebuild going. And you hate to see, if you're a Chargers fan or if you're in the Chargers organization, you hate to see a guy like Mike Williams go because of his physical attributes, his skill set, and what he brought to the table. But compared to the rest of them, they weren't going to touch Keenan Allen. Just sentimental values there. He's a great receiver, very underrated. They were never going to touch him, so it was always going to be Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa. And news broke today as well that Khalil Mack agreed with the organization that they were going to restructure his deal to make it more cap friendly for the Chargers, as well as agreeing that he was going to stay on the team if he restructured his deal. So that basically took Khalil Mack out of the equation as well. And I already said before, I got the sensation. I've read other reports that Joey Bosa was one that was in trade talks, but it never seemed as convincing as Mike Williams or Khalil Mack to get traded. And because all those were basically ruled out, they had no choice to go with Mike Williams. Now, he is a free agent. Other teams can negotiate with him. I'm sure he's going to draw a decent market for himself, but at the same time, he is coming off a rough injury, and his seasons have been pretty decent. He hasn't been like the A1 receiver on his team. The circumstances with Keenan Allen, a lot of receivers aren't gonna be that when lining up alongside Keenan Allen, but he's still attractive in a sense that people see his physical build, the speed, the skill set. It's still going to be there, but I expect it to take a little bit longer because he's got to pass a physical eventually, and where is he in his recovery process and all that stuff. Coming off a knee injury, you don't want to rush that, especially if you're going to pay him a good amount of money. You don't want to rush it in any way, and it's a big gamble, but in saying that, I think he'll draw a good market, but there have been reports that the Chargers are open to bring him back. But then you have to think about it from his point of view. They're willing to take me back, but they already cut me because of the contract that I was on was too expensive for them. How much money am I going to get back from the Chargers if I sign there? All that has to be taken into consideration if you're Mike Williams. And where I wanted to take the story now that, the decision was already made, what was interesting about the decision and all the news that came out afterwards, Mike Williams is gone, they're under the cap, that's fine, but they're still looking to find other ways to get more cap space, and you could do that a variety of different ways. I haven't seen anything about them approaching Joey Bosa about renegotiating his deal, so you could go that route, but, if you haven't mentioned it to him already, you might be thinking that he might not be open to do it. You've reached out to everybody else. I've seen things about Keenan Allen. Khalil Mack obviously has already done it. They've already approached him. With Mike Williams, they haven't approached him just because he seemed like the easiest one to cut. So no one's really approached Joey Bosa about a restructuring of a deal. So that's one way you could do it. It might not be the easiest way, but that's still an option. Another one is still the possibility of trading Bosa or Mack, or actually Bosa or Allen, I guess, in this aspect, because Mack already agreed to restructure his deal. So it seems like Khalil Mack is just going to stay on the team, and he was going to take that $38.5 million cap hit, like I said, but that's going to drop very much. It's going to drop significantly after they get all the details worked out, and once they do that, they'll have more room to make more moves. But this team, I think, they're in a spot where they want to make some big acquisitions to this team because they have Justin Herbert, they have Joey Bosa if they keep him there, they have all this excitement with Jim Harbaugh coming in. On top of that, you're playing in LA, so just that market, that kind of criticism and attention that's always going to be surrounding the team is always going to be there. So you want to put out a good product to get the fans on your side, because it's already no secret that the Chargers fan base isn't one of the strongest. Now with Jim Harbaugh, you have a potential to get more people in, but they're not going to stick around very long if you don't put out a good product. Jim Harbaugh attracts people already in itself, but at the end of the day, it depends on what kind of football you're playing. The results matter probably more than anything as well. So all that just mixes into one solution of trying to lower this cap even more. And how do you do that? Well, that's where this discussion goes, and where this question pops up of, do you still trade Joey Bosa or now potentially Keenan Allen? And to make an argument for either of them, I think Keenan has a stronger argument just because of money-wise. He's able to restructure his deal. He has been said to be open to it, but they haven't really gone any further than that. And with Joey Bosa, he is, like I mentioned, a great pass rusher. You don't just find them of his caliber every day or in every draft. But if you just look at it, with Joey Bosa, he's had to deal with a lot of injuries in his career, or very significant ones. He's 28 years old already, and over the past 2.5 years, he's only played in 14 games over that same stretch of time that Khalil Mack has been on the team, and Khalil Mack hasn't missed any of his games that he's been available for, while Joey Bosa had to deal with a groin injury most recently, and since 2022, he's only managed to get 30 tackles, 9 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and he has spent all of his time here with the Chargers. He was drafted 3rd overall, so to release that player and accept that you can't keep him is going to be hard for the Chargers. But at the same time, he does hold more value than I think Keenan does as well, which is another point where you might look at Bosa and just, shrug and say, what else are we supposed to do? For the greater of this team, we might have to sacrifice him to make the whole rest of the team better, rather than just having one really good player at one position. You could upgrade the whole team a little bit more and maybe just be equal in terms of talent and level at different positions. I think he still garners some interest just because, like I mentioned, he's 28. He has had some success where he's managed to get a lot of sacks, but at the same time, injuries are there. He more recency bias is a real thing. He's not been to the top of his level, so that has to take into account. And then you think of what teams could afford him if he's not willing to restructure his deal or take less money. There's a lot of teams out there with a lot of money. I've seen the 49ers be rumored with him. Maybe they could lure him in because his brother's on there, and that could make him take less money. But, I'm not really too hopeful on them because the Niners still have to figure out a bunch of other stuff like the contract with Brandon Ayuk and fixing and plugging in some holes where some players have already departed. So that's another thing they have to worry about. Another team could be like the Commanders. They still have a lot of money left over. I know they've spent a lot, but they were able to gain a lot of money and cap space. I'm pretty sure they had the most in the NFL. So that's another option, as well as potentially the Las Vegas Raiders could be one. They paid Christian Wilkins, so they could be set already there if they want to look elsewhere. But to have a chance of pairing up Wilkins, Max Crosby, and Joey Bosa, I think would be intriguing. Within the division, I was going to say it's less likely to happen, but the way things have been going this free agency period, it looks like it's more likely to happen. So that's another one. Those are a few options to go with if and only if the Chargers decide to trade him. That's still the biggest question. They have some room to do some stuff now, but like I mentioned before, they have a lot of pressure on them, really, because of all the attention they're bringing in with Jim Harbaugh, with people finally thinking this could be a year where Justin Herbert can really reach his max potential with a good, experienced coach in the NFL that has had success with the 49ers in the past. He returns now to the Los Angeles Chargers where he played before. All that is just very sentimental, very fairy tale-esque. So you have to do something to capitalize on all the attention you're getting right now to develop into some sort of success. But at the same time, we have to just wait and see. There's moves happening every day. Probably every day this week, there's going to be more and more news coming out. So I wouldn't be surprised if something happened this week, but at the same time, this could drag on for a little bit just because it has to do with money and financial situations. But I'll leave that topic there for now. I'm sure I'll retouch on it later on. I will transition now into the second break of this show. And when I come back on the other side, I'm going to talk about the AFC North. I'm going to break down the Cleveland Browns, Steelers, Bengals, and Ravens, all the moves they made, and which teams I really like, and what teams it could have affected the most heading into next season, as well as the discussion on the Washington Commanders and how they've improved a lot, and they could be the biggest winner in this free agency period thus far. So don't go anywhere. More to come on those stories up next.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about the AFC North. One of the, if not the hardest division, in my opinion, in the whole NFL. There's been a lot of moves around each of these teams. A couple of these teams have lost a good amount of players, while others have gained a lot. Some pretty significant ones that we're going to get into right now. But before I do that, I want to remind you guys one more time, if you have any questions, want to engage or make a comment with the show while it's live, to please use the tip and donations link running across the screen down below. The tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. Again, if you can't see it and are listening to this, it's gsmcpodcast.net. It's a big help for the show and all the other shows across the network. But personally, I just think it makes it more fun. I'm allowed to see your questions every time you use that link and engage with it. Engage more of a conversation sort of segment. So that's always better in my opinion. And we always show and give a big thank you to you guys every time you guys are able to do that. But now, going back to the AFC North, taking a closer look at it, the Ravens, the Browns, the Bengals, and the Steelers all had some pending moves, were always voiced to make some sort of move in this free agency period. The Steelers with their quarterback situation, the Bengals with T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, were they able to keep all of them together? And the Cleveland Browns as well. What were they going to do at quarterback, and where else could they potentially improve on offense? Because last year, obviously with the Texans game, they kind of died off in the second half. And then you move on to the Ravens, got the furthest out of all those teams, so how much better could they get? And that's where I want to start with the Ravens. Probably the biggest move made into this division, the signing of Derrick Henry to a 2-year, $16 million deal. He was always voiced to go there. I thought he was going to go to the Texans originally after I saw the Saquon news, but with Joe Mixon heading there, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later when I get to the Bengals, Derrick Henry only really had the Ravens and probably the Cowboys, but with the way the Cowboys are accustomed to do business and are accustomed to really not do anything in free agency or really anything at all this week, they were really not favored to get him. So the Ravens are probably the best team he could have gone to. He decided to go there, still earning around $8 million per year on a 2-year deal. He's already 30 or just over 30. So, that's a good deal for the Ravens, in my opinion. They get a Derrick Henry that could get them over the line just in this next few seasons with Lamar Jackson and the talent level that they have right now. Because one thing, if you look at the Ravens and you don't want to think about, but it's almost inevitable to think about, having such a good, talented team from top to bottom, offense to defense, is really hard to keep from season to season. They've been able to do that now for a couple of seasons, but now heading into this free agency, they've lost 9 players just in the first couple of days of free agency. And signing Derrick Henry is a plus. It's going to make them better. But at the same time, they've lost Morgan Moses to a trade. They lost Patrick Queen. They lost Geno Stone. And a lot of other players I'm not mentioning. Devin Duvernay is another one. He signed with the Jags. There's 5 or 4 more that were prominent players on this team that are not going to be coming back. So how are they going to look going forward? More so on defense. Luckily for them, they were able to keep Justin Madubuike to keep that pass rush as prominent as it was. But losing a Patrick Queen, a Geno Stone were big pieces for their defense. So how are they going to look next season? I still expect them to be probably the first or second best team in this division. The next team I'm going to talk about is the Browns, who I think have a good chance of being first or second because they didn't really lose anybody big. I know a lot of fans wanted Joe Flacco to come back, but unfortunately he's not, or it doesn't seem like it, because Jameis Winston was signed by them to a one-year deal, $4 million guaranteed to him. You'd expect him to slide in as the number 2 option behind Deshaun Watson, but at the same time he was almost always challenging Derek Carr, to some points at least last season, to be the starter after Derek Carr had some bad games or the team just didn't look right. Jameis Winston came in, or Derek Carr got hurt and Jameis Winston came in. So I think that could be an interesting story that develops with the Cleveland Browns and Deshaun Watson, because he's come back and he's had some games where he looked a little bit closer to what he did in Houston, but there were other games where, the throws weren't where they were supposed to be. He threw, or he had some turnovers, and he just looked very uncomfortable and very much not like himself of Houston. So, I think that signing Jameis Winston allows them to maybe experiment a little bit more, with Joe Flacco. He had a great fairy tale comeback in the later part of last season, but you wonder how much of that he really has left. Was that all of it and he emptied it out last season? He is very old now, so how much money did you want to allocate to him to come back if you had the chance to sign Jameis Winston? The choice wasn't really a hard one in my opinion, so they signed Jameis Winston. They were able to re-sign Zadarius Smith to complement Myles Garrett and their very impressive defensive front. He returns on a 2-year deal, and they were able to sign Jordan Hicks from the Minnesota Vikings as well on a 2-year deal, and he essentially replaces Anthony Walker, who moved on to the Miami Dolphins. So you get another veteran in there to slot in for an outgoing veteran and still have almost the same contributions that you would with Anthony Walker. And another move that was pretty big was that they re-signed Shelby Harris. He's a good run stopper for them, just good within the trenches and very underrated, but he always seems to make a difference when you're really watching the game and seeing the other team get less than 3 or 4 yards per carry. He's a big reason why. So it was big that they re-signed him. But looking at all those signings, they were very positive in a way that you got guys that were experienced. Oh, and I also didn't mention they signed Nyheim Hines to a $3.5 million deal for 1 year. And if you look at the Browns and just the overall signings that they've made just so far, it's good because they got those players back, Zadarius Smith and Shelby Harris, like I mentioned. You're also able to go somewhere different with Jameis Winston and Nyheim Hines and Jordan Hicks. But Zadarius Smith, Jordan Hicks, they are 32 years old now, so they're still good players, but, you wonder, similarly to the Ravens, how much of that really good core that you can get out of that is able to produce the kind of performances like you had last year. It's going to be hard to live up to that. I expect them to drop down a little bit because, having that kind of stellar season in terms of just defense alone, I think it's hard to replicate no matter who you are. So I do expect a dip, but I don't think it'll be that drastic just because they got all these guys back. But you have to wonder long-term, how much do these guys still have left? Zadarius Smith, Jordan Hicks, still good players. I expect them to be good. But it's just a question that you have in the back of your mind. Like, there could be a drop. You have to always deal with injuries more as you get older. That's just a fact. So it's something to keep an eye on. But regardless, I think with Nick Chubb, Amari Cooper, now Jerry Jeudy on their team as well. I failed to mention him. They got him through a trade. Offensively, they're going to be better. It might make it easier for whoever's throwing the ball. And I'd like the addition of Jerry Jeudy, but at the same time, you have to just wonder where their quarterback decision is. Right now it's obviously Deshaun Watson, but he's missed some time, hasn't looked as he should for a quarterback that's getting paid $230 million. So that's going to drag out, I believe, but it shouldn't affect them too much in the overall outlook of the season. Moving on to the next team, the Cincinnati Bengals are an interesting one because I think they got one of the best players in free agency in Geno Stone from the Baltimore Ravens of all teams, just following along with the trend. Geno Stone is a safety, slot, corner, dime package sort of player that is everywhere for the Baltimore Ravens, had a breakout year last year, and with him being a free agent, he was always going to get a lot of attention for the teams that paid attention to the Baltimore Ravens defense and how good they were. And now he signs with the Cincinnati Bengals. A big move for them. But, I mean, before I get to the other side, they also signed Irv Smith, which was a positive. Or actually, no, that's Irv Smith was lost. He signed with the Chiefs. And they were able to re-sign Cody Ford, is what I meant to say, and get a good player for their offensive line back. But the questions come now with the other side of it and who they lost. I just mentioned Irv Smith. He's now gone. You might think, all right, he's not huge, but he was one of their few tight ends that they had that was very prominent and involved in the offense. They lost one of their starting cornerbacks in Chidobe Awuzie. He signed with the Tennessee Titans, and there still remains... Oh, and they also traded Joe Mixon to the Texans, like I mentioned before, and they signed Zach Moss to replace him. So I think Joe Mixon can give you more than Zach Moss. He's a better player than Zach Moss, but if you had to take a cut somewhere, that was one that was significant enough to get you to where you needed to be, because it all leads into trying to re-sign T. Higgins and, in the future, Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase is going to obviously want a big chunk of money. He's deserved it. He's definitely deserved it because he's been up there with some historic performances that he's had for the Bengals compared to his LSU teammate in Justin Jefferson. You could say they've been the best two rookies that have come out in a long time from college. They're established as top 5 to 7 receivers. You know, you can make the argument for a lot of guys, but those two guys are definitely young, very good already, and they are the faces of their teams, essentially. It's a little bit different with the Bengals and Joe Burrow, but Justin Jefferson is clearly the face of the Vikings now. And with the Bengals, I'm sure Jamar Chase feels like he should get the kind of money the top players are making, just based on the impact he makes to the Bengals. Then that's where T. Higgins comes along. You look at him. He's still very young. I think he's 24 years old. And I'm sure he wants a lot of money because he sees that he could be the number one receiver on a bunch of other different teams. Now, with Calvin Ridley moving on, the Jaguars jump into the conversation, the Arizona Cardinals, the Titans were in the conversation, but, they just got Calvin Ridley, so how much do you need T. Higgins? The Kansas City Chiefs would be another one that wouldn't surprise me. T. Higgins is franchise tag, so he's not undoubtedly going to get traded, but it is something to look at because the Bengals had this trio of wide receivers of Tyler Boyd, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins that could all be lost on top of Joe Mixon as well. So all your talented skill position players you could lose 3 out of the 4 of them, worst case scenario, because I don't think they'll lose Chase ever, really. So you've already traded Joe Mixon. You're most likely not going to sign Tyler Boyd back, and that leaves you with just T. Higgins, who is teetering. You're really hoping he doesn't leave, because if he does leave, then where do you look? Your draft plans change essentially, and so the Bengals are now also in a place very different than they were or compared to the Ravens, because the Ravens have questions defensively, and offensively they got better, and the Bengals are still good defensively, but their offense could be torn to shreds if they lose Mixon, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd all in one free agency period. They have to balance the books a little bit now, even more, to make sure that doesn't happen, but they're a team that I think is really teetering on falling off significantly more than the others because of Joe Burrow still being very good, but he can't throw the ball to himself, essentially. He needs weapons, and with them still trying to figure out T. Higgins and losing out on other targets, what options are they going to have left over? That all has to be worked out. So the Bengals are in grave danger, potentially, more than the other teams. But in saying that, that brings me on to the last team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They made some of the biggest moves, I think. They signed Russell Wilson, obviously, to the veteran minimum. They were able to sign a punter after they released Presley Harvin in Cameron Johnston from the Texans. The biggest move, I think, regardless of anything and what else happened in the division, is them signing Patrick Queen, the former Baltimore Raven, to a 3-year, $41 million year deal. And there's a bunch of things that make this great. One is that he's coming from the Ravens because of what kind of defense they run, the kind of leadership and the kind of player that he was there, a very important piece to them. Not only do you make your team significantly better, because you've been looking for an inside linebacker for probably since Ryan Shazier got hurt in that unfortunate injury he suffered against the Bengals. You've probably been looking for a very good linebacker since then. You have the potential to have found one who is still young at 25 years old, and on top of that, you make the Ravens worse. A team you're going to face twice a year in your division. You make them worse as a result of it. I love the move for the Steelers because I am a Steelers fan, but in the end, I think it just worked out, and they took the best linebacker off the market as well. So that's always going to be a positive. And then in terms of some departures, they released Patrick Peterson and their starting center, Mason Cole. That's going to be a big part because someone's going to have to snap the ball to Russell Wilson, so you hope it's somebody of a good level. And Pat Pete, he's still rumored to come back, but, you know, he is getting up there in age. And with cornerbacks especially, it's a lot more obvious when you're not up to standard than any other position, like D-line or linebacker or something else. If you're constantly getting beat off a release or in space, it's a lot more noticeable when they show it on the replays and everything like that in live time. It's pretty brutal, but it is where they stand right now with Patrick Peterson. And Deontay Johnson, another one, he was traded to the Carolina Panthers for Dante Jackson, and a sixth going to the Panthers, or a sixth going to the Steelers, and I think the Steelers sent over a 7th-round pick, something along those lines. So that was another one that a lot of people didn't expect because Deontay was a good, arguably their number one receiver, their longest tenured receiver, but he was due a $4 million bonus by March 16th, I want to say. So if the rumors were true and you were looking to trade Deontay Johnson, you were going to have to do it before then, so you wouldn't pay him that money and then make him leave. Everyone was expecting a decision to be made soon. That actually happened yesterday, I think right after I got off this show. So that happened, and now wide receiver kind of jumps to the top of the list for the Pittsburgh Steelers of what they're looking for in the draft, because you can't only have George Pickens. As much as you want to run the ball a lot with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, you're gonna have to have some outside threat to throw to other than George Pickens, because he's already getting double teamed. And you want to make everyone see that this investment in Russell Wilson was a good one, and that can't happen if he doesn't have anybody to throw to. And for the longest time, you've talked about the Steelers being a quarterback away, or they just need one or two pieces. I'm not saying Russell Wilson is that guy, their savior to take them to the AFC Championship game and potentially a Super Bowl, but he is better than what they've been doing with Kenny Pickett. I know Matt Canada's been there. Russell Wilson won't have to deal with that, but getting rid of Matt Canada and having somebody to compete with Kenny Pickett, I think, was the best thing that could have happened for them. They have it now. So regardless if it's a competition or not with Wilson and Pickett, you're better there. And I think just off all the reasons I mentioned, with the Bengals potentially getting worse, the Browns probably being your biggest threat for second place, and the Ravens as well. Oh, it's always going to be a close game with the Ravens. No team is going to be that much better than the other. The Steelers beat the Ravens twice last year. They swept them. So nothing's really given at all in this division. It's one of the most up in the air type of divisions. But I just think with the Steelers, trying to put all my bias aside, I think they've made more impactful decisions that more people would agree made them better compared to the other teams where, other than the Ravens, because they signed Derrick Henry, other than the other teams like the Browns and the Bengals where they've made good signings, but they've lost more significant pieces. And, a lot of people don't know where they stand. That's kind of where I stand on it. I think the Steelers are really going outside their comfort zone in doing this. I'm a big fan of them doing this. Omar Khan, their new general manager from 2 years ago, I'm a big fan of him doing this because it not only makes the team better, obviously, but he, I think, gets a lot more fans on his side by doing this and makes the team better just by taking chances, going out there and getting players in that you believe will make this team better. I hope it continues like this for the Steelers' sake, but again, it's very interesting where that team is, where those teams are in that division, and where they're all going to end up. I could think the Ravens are going to be good, but it always takes an injury or two or just things not to go your way to really just flip everything on its head. So we're going to see how that develops. And in the meantime, I'll send it to the last break of the show. And on the flip side of that, I will come back with the Washington Commanders and them being a potential dark horse in the NFC going forward. So stick around. All that is coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Welcome back to the show, the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, for the last time in today's episode. Jumping right in to the last segment, the Washington Commanders, a team that I think a lot of people aren't looking at as being anywhere close to being relevant or competitive at all this coming year. But I'm here to tell you why you could be wrong, just because of all the acquisitions that they made to their team. Just to list them off, I think undoubtedly they've made the most additions to their team in the NFC East. So already in the NFC East, I think they're going to be better. But I'm looking a bit longer down the road in an NFC that I think is going to become more and more unpredictable than it already has been. In terms of their additions, they added Zach Ertz, who was a free agent. They've taken a player from the Dallas Cowboys in Dorrance Armstrong on a 3-year deal. Another Cowboys player, Tyler Bradish, on a 3-year deal as well to play center for them. The Panthers linebacker, Frankie Louvu, on another 3-year deal. The Chargers running back, Austin Eckler, on a 2-year deal. That one's probably the most impactful, the more eye-catching one out of the bunch. They signed Brandon McManus as well from the Jaguars. The Chiefs guard in the Super Bowl, Nick Allegretti, wasn't a starter, but he came in and still played pretty well. So that's a good addition in my opinion. The 49ers defensive end, Cleveland Farrell, who was a former first-round pick for the Las Vegas Raiders and hasn't really developed into the kind of player that everyone expected him to. But I think for what they did have in the past, a first-round talent is still a first-round talent. So that's a good signing on a very low-risk 1-year deal. So not really too much to worry about there if it doesn't work out. Marcus Mariota also signed to a 1-year deal, and they signed another Cowboys defensive end in Dante Fowler. a lot of additions to this team that was very lackluster and has just carried this mantra of being very mediocre, not really taken seriously in the division. When you think of the NFC East, you think of the Cowboys, the Eagles, and that's really about it. Just in the last few years, based on just what the Giants have been doing, the way they're trending now, the Eagles getting Saquon, the Cowboys not really getting anybody, but they're still the Cowboys. So in terms of competition, you just automatically think it's going to be the Cowboys and the Eagles, and the rest are just going to fall wherever they may fall. Nobody expects anything of them. But I think the additions are great in one aspect, but then the additions off the field in a new general manager in Adam Peters and a new head coach with Dan Quinn, that is game changing in and of itself, because Ron Rivera was decent, but I don't think having a whole head coaching position to rebuild a whole organization was really a job suited for him. Dan Quinn has been a head coach before. He has been successful with the Falcons in the past. And as a defensive coordinator, he's been arguably better. But I just think it was time now to go back and try out head coaching again. Because of all the success you've had as a coordinator, I thought that he would bring that experience, defensive prowess with him over to the Washington Commanders. And already they had some pieces, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson on the offensive side of the ball, Brian Anderson Jr. as well. Defensively, they lost Montez Sweat to the Bears. So that's where they needed the most improvement. And that's where really they attacked this offseason so far. They signed like 3 or 4 defensive linebacker players. So that's always going to be good. Before I got on here, the news broke that they brought in Bobby Wagner as well on a 1-year deal, $8.5 million deal. So that's another guy on the defensive end that is going to add a lot of experience, leadership, communication is always huge on the defensive side of the ball. He's going to add that regardless if he doesn't play every play. Frankie Louvu is another good player that they can add, that is added to this team. So defensively, they undoubtedly got better. And now offense, you still have to figure it out, but you're not down to the bare bones of what you're trying to decide from. Terry McLaurin is a very good, underrated player that I don't think has tapped into his full potential, just because he's never really had a very good quarterback, talented quarterback throwing him the ball. Jahan Dotson is another good player. He's a solid number 2, number 3 receiver. So you might have to find another receiver, but in the end, you still have all these pieces, especially with the addition of Austin Eckler, which I don't think he could have ended up in a much better spot, because you saw how he played in his last year with the Chargers. He was dealing with a lot of injuries, and it just wasn't the season that everyone thought he was going to have. But now you bring him into the Washington Commanders. He has Brian Anderson Jr., who I think is a low-end, top of the number 2 kind of running back players. He's not up to the elite of the elite, but he is a solid player that was their starter, put up solid numbers for them, and now you could just spot him with Austin Eckler, which not only works out best for the team to have 2 very good, very solid running backs, but it works out best for Austin Eckler because it lowers his risk of getting hurt, playing every down, 3 downs, having to be the guy over and over again, taking that punishment. You take that out of the equation now and bring in Brian Anderson, who's younger, has less miles on him. So I think that's the best situation for Austin Eckler to kind of be in that 1-2 combination of backfield. And then you buffed up the offensive line with the addition of Allegretti, Tyler Bradish on that offensive line as well. And that's always going to be huge for if you draft a quarterback or not. And defensive line, like I mentioned, a bunch of DNs and linebackers coming in. And that all wraps up into this idea of you increase the talent around every position around the quarterback. You still need to figure out the quarterback. Sam Howell doesn't seem like he's going to work out in Washington. especially with Dan Quinn and a new general manager coming in. They didn't draft Sam Howell, so usually when that happens, they want to bring in their own guy. And how much better can it get than having the number 2 overall pick in this year's draft? I mentioned it before when I talked about the top 3 teams. They were the most quarterback-ready team of any of those top 3 teams. And if one team was not going to trade down, it should be them because they were more talented than the Patriots and the Chicago Bears right off the bat at the start of free agency. Now they got even better, and it just puts this thought into my head. If they were to draft Jaden Daniels or the Bears keep Justin Fields, move back, and another team goes up there and takes Jaden Daniels maybe number 1 because they like him better, the Washington Commanders can have Caleb Williams as a number 2 overall pick. They don't have to do anything. Or they could always trade up with the Chicago Bears if they feel that's a good option for them to get Caleb to play for his hometown team in Washington, D.C. You know, they're in a good situation where they really only need a quarterback, and you're going to get 1 or 2 of the most talented quarterbacks in the draft. If you get one of those guys, really develop him with Dan Quinn and that offense with Terry McLaurin, Austin Eckler now in there, a decent offensive line now that you can work with, you could still improve upon, but that's just all tying into this situation of the best situation for a rookie quarterback to come in and potentially be ready to play right away, which is what you expect from a Caleb Williams who has been talked about for a long time now. Before he was even eligible, he was being talked about as this generational, transitional type of quarterback. And Jaden Daniels as well now, coming off a Heisman season, he's also been touted as potentially better than Caleb Williams by some teams' evaluation of him. So whoever they get, they're not really going to lose out on one or the other because it seems like it's getting more and more even between Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. So say they get Jaden Daniels and he's come into this team, and I just think his running ability, he's very good technically throwing the ball already. He doesn't really have to work on the mechanics at all a bit. He could come in right away and not move mountains, and I'm not saying they're going to win the NFC Championship, but he would drastically be better than any quarterback they've had in the last few years. And they've already been sort of competitive, you know, kind of flirting with the playoffs a little bit. If you add the best quarterback that they've had in a long time, how could you not say they're not going to compete for a playoff spot in an NFC where, even in the NFC East, where they always play, it seems the Cowboys tough, always a good game with the Giants. The Eagles, they played them very well this past season as well. Now you improve at a quarterback and make all these additions. I think I'm already able to say from this that the Commanders could be a very interesting team to watch next season. And if they get their guy in the draft and then just continue to make improvements, because they've been one of the most aggressive teams in free agency, if they continue that attitude and just continue to get better on defense and help that offensive line a bit more, I don't see why you would take the Eagles or the Buccaneers or the Minnesota Vikings over them in a deciding game if they're trying to get into the playoffs, or in a wild card game. If you were to take, you would probably take the 49ers over them, probably arguably the Packers, the 49ers, and the Eagles over them. But then any other team, I don't think it would be a given that the Commanders are just going to lie down and get beat by the Rams or the Seahawks, the Cowboys, those sort of teams. I don't think it's a given. Maybe even the Lions as well. They would make it a good game. And I truly believe that's where they stand right now. Obviously, we have to see where it all ends up, but I think the Commanders are really in a good spot right now where a lot of people aren't really talking about them because they're the Commanders, and they're going to have to really prove it for anybody to really believe it. But I'm just saying it now. I'm really liking the additions that the Commanders have made so far. I think it has been a great start for them, but they can't be complacent and be satisfied right now because of who they are and the kind of reputation that they've built. I think they have to get better and ensure that they are going to be good this year with Dan Quinn and with a good young offense, potentially, if they get a good quarterback in there to kind of drive it all home. But, that's still yet to be decided. The draft is going to play a big part in it. And I'm sure there's going to be a trade, so that's also going to be a big pivotal thing that happens. But, we're going to have to wait and see on where that ends up. But in saying that, that's all the time I'm going to have for this episode. Again, I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode. And as always, remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of this network's content. If you want to see more of this show and of me and all the stuff that I put out, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel for YouTube shorts that are posted every day, individual videos of each segment that I do on the live show. So if you don't want to watch a whole live show or you missed one segment, it's all on the channels afterwards. And if you do want to watch a whole live episode, they're all also on there as well. Make sure to always tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football conversations with me, your host, Manny Moradiege, saying thank you for tuning in as always, and I will see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.